people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Another angle to a story we talked about in a previous upload. The IBF mandate ordering Ebony Bridges, the reigning IBF bantamweight champion, to take on her countrywoman and arch nemesis, Shotgun Shannon OConnell.
They don't like each other.
Yeah, tell me something I don't know. These screenshots were taken by way of social media. A fan of Ebony Bridges, the blonde bomber, asked, who is Shotgun Shannon OConnell, and why are the boxing Twitter brigade teaming up with her to slag you off?
It's not a secret that Ebony Bridges has fast become the most recognizable face and the most recognizable fighter at bantamweight.
Whereas Shannon OConnell has been around a lot longer than Ebony, but she's nowhere near as well known. Ebony Bridges herself stated she's a nobody, and the people teaming up with her are just haters. She's desperate for attention and begging me for exposure, but I won't give it to her because she literally offers me nothing.
Like I said, it's not a secret that Ebony Bridges is more mainstream than Shannon OConnell, even though Shannon OConnell's been around a lot longer.
So it's not saying that Shannon OConnell doesn't have supporters, doesn't have followers and a following. She actually does. It's just more domestic as opposed to international, the way that Ebony Bridges fans.
Yeah, she's got fans and supporters all over the place. UK, US.
Shannon's following is somewhat smaller than Ebony's and a lot more domestic, more exclusive to the Australian boxing scene. A Twitter user that goes by the name Jennifer Jenner said she's going to try avoid fighting you. She's just a nasty piece of work.
DW about her comments.
To which Shotgun Shannon OConnell herself replied, she's making herself look stupid, if anything.
Ebony Bridges doesn't have the luxury of choice here. She doesn't even have the luxury of skipping around this mandate with a unification match.
Per the IBF's own bylaws, because this order from the IBF has already come down, and because Ebony doesn't have prior approval to unify with another champion at the weight of which there are 3, she doesn't have much of a choice. She has to fight Shannon or vacate the IBF title.
For anybody that might have been confused about this,
the IBF's bylaws read, prior approval is required. No IBF or USBA champion shall box or sign to box a champion or for another championship of another sanctioning body in seeking to unify a title unless prior approval is granted by the championships committee. Once the IBF has sent out the notice of the date and the purse bid, or once a contract has been signed for a mandatory bout, no request for a unification contest will be approved. A champion's failure to comply with this requirement will constitute sufficient cause for the championships committee and board of directors to consider withdrawing recognition of the title and remove he or she from the IBF's ratings.
In layman's terms, unless Ebony Bridges got prior approval for a unification match, she doesn't have that option.
And when last I checked, before this order from the IBF came down, the plan for Ebony was to let her have a voluntary title defense and then follow that up with a unification match. So as it stands, I don't think Ebony has prior approval for a unification match because that's not what the plan was. Shannon OConnell herself said, if I'm such a nobody, then wouldn't she be happy to fight her mandatory defense and then move on? Also writing off her name, well, if she beats me, then I don't, do I? She's not coming across overly confident in her ability. A Twitter user that goes by the name Rossi stated, so does that mean she's dodging the fight and letting the belt go?
Ebony Bridges said no such thing.
Since that order came down just 1 or 2 days ago, Ebony Bridges has made no mention of vacating the blue belt, vacating the IBF title. Shannon OConnell stated she's talking like she thinks she's Canelo or something, so surely she won't dodge an easy win.
Just a few passing thoughts.
In my previous upload, I talked about the stylistic matchup that both Ebony Bridges and Shannon OConnell, they're both aggressive mid-range to inside pressure fighters, one being more experienced than the other, but better still, they have that in common. They have that common ground. Though as far as the fight, and the perception of the fight. If Ebony Bridges can beat Shannon OConnell, she may end up getting more credit for beating Shannon than what she's gotten.
Than what she got for winning the IBF title, than what she got for beating Maria Cecilia Roman.
Bear in mind that Maria Cecilia Roman has been around a long time, the same as Shannon OConnell, and Maria Cecilia Roman was a reigning champion, a long-standing one. But I'd wager that if Ebony Bridges can beat Shannon OConnell, she may get more credit for that than what she got for beating Maria. And maybe it's because Shannon is perceived as being a bigger threat than Maria.
She's certainly a bigger puncher, though unlike Maria, Shannon's been stopped 2 times before.
Maria hasn't. In the entirety of her career, Maria Cecilia Roman has never been stopped, and yet a lot of people out there refuse to give Ebony Bridges credit for winning the IBF title from her.
No, Ebony didn't stop her, but the point I'm making is it's not like Ebony Bridges hasn't faced a seasoned, experienced fighter before. She has.
She beat the champion to be a champion, and yet there are a lot of people out there that still harbor a lot of hostility towards Ebony Bridges. Shannon OConnell among them. The bad blood between them is worse even, I'd say, than the bad blood between Ebony Bridges and Shannon Courtenay.
If you thought that those two didn't like each other, get a whiff of this.
There is a September 26th deadline before the fight ends up going to a purse bid.
That's the grace period. They've got until September 26th to do the fight, reach a deal.
What's in it for Ebony is she gets to hang on to the blue belt, gets to hang on to the IBF title if she beats Shannon OConnell and further legitimizes herself as a serious fighter, a serious champion in the sport. There's more in it for Shannon OConnell. She gets an instant profile boost if she gives Ebony Bridges her next professional loss by taking the IBF title from her.
Like I said, Shannon OConnell's a lot more experienced than Ebony, but nowhere near as well known.
The fight itself has the potential to yield the same as or an even more pleasing aesthetic than the Shannon Courtenay fight did, because there's bad blood here, even more bad blood than there was in that fight.
There's more potential that somebody gets stopped in this fight.
Because Shannon OConnell is proven to have legitimate stopping power, and she's a more experienced fighter than Ebony Bridges, though at the same time, Shannon OConnell has been stopped before.
She's been stopped 2 times before, and Ebony Bridges is a heavy-handed puncher.
A lot of her critics may be underestimating that pivotal factor, that this ain't Kylie Fulmer, this ain't Shernika Johnson, and this ain't Taylor Robertson. Ebony Bridges packs a bigger punch than those girls do.
There's a lot of bad blood, and it makes for an excellent fight.
We'll see if they don't get this one over the line between now and September 26th. In men's lightweight news, former champion Ishay Smith took to social media and stated, Gervonta Davis is the face of boxing. Whenever you can pack arenas in different time zones, different coasts, and you bring out the stars, as he does, you're the face, bro. That's who it is. The culture and this young generation fucks with Tank, to which I myself replied, hard to say he's the face of the sport when he's not the top draw in this country. He's having modest success due to low operational costs. Face? Nah.
It's strange to see this kind of an annotation coming from a fighter, a champion, a former champion.
But even fighters themselves and former champions are capable of being off base. I mean, look at Paulie Malignaggi, one of the best analysts in the sport, a former champion and fighter himself. He picked George Kambosos to beat Devin Haney.
Even fighters get it wrong sometimes.
And everything a fighter or a former champion says isn't automatically made gospel because they said it. I see Ishay Smith saying these things about Gervonta Davis packing out arenas in different time zones on different coasts, but regardless of what arenas and time zones he's fighting in, he's still not generating more revenue in the sport than Canelo Alvarez.
Nope.
For a perspective, the network where Gervonta Davis fights, Showtime, that premium cable network, offered Canelo Alvarez more money than they offered Gervonta Davis.
If Gervonta Davis really were the face of boxing, why would Showtime offer Canelo Alvarez more money up front than they're offering Gervonta?
We're not just talking about a few million more than what Gervonta makes. We're talking about a sizable difference. Canelo Alvarez got an estimated $40 million up front on Showtime for fighting Caleb Plant, whereas Gervonta, in his last fight, he got a meager $2 million up front.
If Gervonta Davis is the face of boxing, why is Showtime willing to offer Canelo 20 times as much money?
It's a lot of money.
Why aren't they offering Gervonta Davis that kind of money? Why aren't they guaranteeing Gervonta Davis that kind of scratch if he's supposedly the face of boxing and Canelo Alvarez isn't? And never mind that when Canelo did box on that network, he put up substantially more pay-per-view buys than any of Gervonta Davis's fights.
He put up more pay-per-view buys than Gervonta on Showtime and off Showtime, because even with the Dimitri Bivol fight,
The Dimitri Bivol pay-per-view, that single pay-per-view put up better numbers than any of Gervonta Davis's Davis's pay-per-view appearances, of which there are four. Four now.
You know that by the time that Canelo Alvarez was the same age that Gervonta Davis is now, he already fought Gennady Golovkin.
He already fought him at least once. I mean, for a perspective, Canelo Alvarez had already made several pay-per-view appearances by the time he was the same age that Gervonta is now, and every single one of those fights, every single one of those pay-per-views put up bigger numbers than anything Gervonta Davis has put up so far. Gervonta has yet to crack 300,000 pay-per-view buys with any fight he's had, whereas Canelo Alvarez, he was able to put that up with Liam Smith.
Gervonta Davis's best numbers on his best day are Canelo Alvarez's worst numbers.
Canelo Alvarez's worst numbers are still more substantial than what you see in Gervonta Davis's best. So the information, it really does speak for itself. This is a numbers game after all, and when it comes to numbers, Gervonta Davis ain't generating the numbers, generating the interest, bringing the eyes and the revenue to the sport that Canelo Alvarez is. I think that goes without saying. By the time Canelo Alvarez was 27 years old, he already put up 900,000 pay-per-view buys with Miguel Cotto, already put up over 1 million with Gennady Golovkin, and that's not even including the smaller fights that he had, the smaller pay-per-views, that still brought in more numbers and more revenue than anything Gervonta Davis is doing. So how could a former champion who knows the industry and knows the sport the way that Ishay knows the sport, how could he arrive at the conclusion that Gervonta Davis is the face when all the evidence is to the contrary?
Like I said, not everything that a fighter or a former champion says is the gospel just because they're the ones that said it.
Gervonta Davis is not now having the same success Canelo had when he was his same age, and he's not now putting up better numbers than Canelo Alvarez is still putting up. So how could you arrive at a conclusion like this? And it's cognitive dissonance, if it's anything. It really is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes in reference to this fighter and how successful he really is. It really is the state of inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes when it comes to Gervonta Davis. Maybe you want him to be the face of boxing,
But he's not.
The sport has had several faces over the years throughout different eras of the sport. In this era, Canelo Alvarez is the face. In the era before it, it was Floyd. And in the era before that, it was Oscar De La Hoya. And these were the top earning fighters, the top earning athletes, because that is what is consistent with the proverbial face of boxing. Whoever the face is, they tend to make more money, generate more interest than everyone else.
And they also pay out life-altering purses, life-altering cash. Nobody's getting life-altering money to fight Gervonta Davis.
Without Gervonta Davis, fighters like Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney, they're making very good money. More money than Gervonta is paying his opponents. More money than those fighters are getting for fighting the quote-unquote face of boxing. So how's he the face of boxing?
He's not the face of boxing. He's not the top-earning athlete in the sport. He's not the sports ambassador.
And whatever culture it is that Ishay is referencing, it's not boxing culture.
Yeah, maybe Gervonta's the face of the culture that Ishay's talking about, but that culture
is not enough to make Gervonta the face of this sport.
You can think of 3 or 4 guys that generate more revenue than Gervonta Davis in this sport.
Canelo Alvarez being the most obvious, and Anthony Joshua. Is Gervonta Davis set to fight in any $80 million fights? And what about Tyson Fury? What did he get in his last fight for Dillian White? Wasn't it something like $30 million? Does Gervonta Davis get $30 million a fight?
Gervonta Davis ain't the face of boxing.
In spite of the cognitive dissonance of just a few, Gervonta's not the face of boxing. And if what this is justification for the fights that he's not having.
What, he's the face of boxing so he don't have to fight his contemporaries? Last I checked, that's what the face of boxing does.
Look, what Gervonta Davis really is a moderately successful fighter who can draw a bit and turn over a profit because the operational costs for his fights are very low. These aren't even high-profile opponents he's fighting. Isaac Cruz, Rolly Romero.
You ain't gotta break the bank to make those fights.
Being moderately successful doesn't make him the face of boxing when he is not generating the same revenue, not generating the same interest that other fighters are generating. And finally, in men's heavyweight news, in reference to what is a real draw in the sport, one of the real faces of boxing, Anthony Joshua says, "I feel like I never got that respect as someone that people feared. When I came into this division, it was whack. I thought, I'm going to come in and take on everyone. I feel like I'm not getting looked at as someone who is a dominant heavyweight."
Early on, it was established that Anthony Joshua is worth a lot of money.
When Anthony Joshua, people over there at Matchroom, were able to finance a multi-million-dollar guarantee to Charles Martin, that was well in excess of Charles Martin's actual market value, his marquee value, it became crystal clear that Anthony Joshua is a big-name fighter with a lot of money behind him. And it's for this reason that many of his contemporaries, even then, didn't fear taking him on because of the financial incentive in order to do so. That win or lose, you're going to make a lot of money.
They said Charles Martin got paid something like $5 or $6 million for that fight, even though Charles Martin wasn't a $5 or $6 million fighter.
He only got that money as a fighter and as a champion because Anthony Joshua himself generated enough revenue to make it possible to pay that to Charles Martin, the then unbeaten champion, to come over. So when you got that kind of money behind you, guys aren't going to shy away from fighting you quite as much as a high-risk, low-reward guy. Anthony Joshua has always yielded a high reward, even if in some instances he was a high risk.
This is consistent with cash cows, real cash cows.
Not make-believe pretend cash cows like that butterball from Baltimore. Real cash cows pay out life-altering purses, life-altering money. Before that fight, Charles Martin wasn't making $5-6 million a fight. Hell, even Deontay Wilder wasn't making that kind of money at the time. He wasn't making $5 or $6 million a fight. So it goes without saying that a part of the reason that Anthony Joshua was never quite feared in the division is because there was always a big financial incentive in order to fight him. In tandem with Anthony Joshua taking on all comers, never shying away from a fight,
Losing to Ruiz didn't help his image, and more recently, losing to Alexander Usyk, that didn't help either.
it takes me back to when Lennox Lewis lost to Oliver McCall. A good number of the American fight fans, they didn't think much of Lennox Lewis as a result of that. When he lost to Rahman some years after, it was the same kind of situation, the same deal, even though Lennox Lewis did go on to be one of the most dominant heavyweights in the history of heavyweight boxing. Anthony Joshua, for the most part,
He has been dominant, more dominant than Deontay Wilder.
You heard what I said. Their reigns as champions are really only a year apart, even though Deontay Wilder was around for some years before Anthony Joshua even turned pro. Yet Deontay Wilder won his WBC title in 2015, never unified it. Anthony Joshua won the IBF title a year later in 2016, but Anthony Joshua, unlike Deontay Wilder, actually unified titles in the heavyweight division with other champions. He can say that he was a unified champion, and not just a unified champion, a two-time heavyweight champion, which is an even shorter list. To date, Deontay Wilder hasn't become a champion since losing to Tyson Fury, has he?
No, he hasn't.
Whereas Anthony Joshua, he did win his belts back in the second fight with Andy Ruiz and racked up yet another successful title defense against Kubrat Pulev. Now, more recently, he did lose to Alexander Usyk.
But comparatively, he has been more dominant than Deontay Wilder.
Some people seem to wrestle with that proposition, though I don't know why, because Deontay Wilder was around for many, many years. And, he didn't fight for a title until later on in his career, and he never unified anything.
Perhaps Anthony Joshua's prim and proper image is a part of the reason that he was never feared.
A user-friendly heavyweight that's very marketable with a lot of endorsements, kind to the fans, gracious with the media.
For a long time, provided the biggest financial incentive for all his contemporaries, all his opponents.
But as far as dominance goes, he has exhibited some of that because he unified titles in this division, unlike Deontay Wilder, without exhibiting any of the intermittent retirement stints like Tyson Fury.